Grace Collins never expected the bullet meant for her husband to become the moment that erased her existence. Save Sophia first. Lorenzo De Luca's command ripped through the smoke as masked assassins descended upon the annual summit of every mafia family on the East Coast. Gunfire exploded across the grand ballroom. Capos shouted orders. Bodyguards formed desperate human shields while terrified guests scrambled for cover. Sophia Romano collapsed dramatically in front of Lorenzo, blood staining her elegant white gown. Every eye turned toward the beautiful woman who appeared to have sacrificed herself for the most feared mafia boss in America. No one noticed Grace. Hidden behind the chaos, she spotted the faint flash of a sniper's scope, aimed directly at Lorenzo's heart. Without hesitation, she threw herself into the bullet's path. The impact shattered her breath, but she never cried out. Instead, she forced herself back to her feet, quietly dragging wounded guards and frightened servants toward safety before disappearing into the smoke. 30 minutes later, as emergency crews fought to save the injured, a dying bodyguard pressed a blood-soaked wedding ring into Lorenzo's trembling hand. "Boss," he whispered, "it wasn't Miss Sophia who took the bullet for you." For the first time in years, the ruler of an empire felt genuine fear. 3 years before the gunfire shattered the East Coast Mafia summit, Grace Collins had entered the De Luca mansion without applause, celebration, or love. The marriage had never been a romance. It was an agreement, a carefully negotiated alliance that stabilized business interests, ended several dangerous disputes between influential families, and protected thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the De Luca empire remaining united. Lorenzo De Luca accepted the arrangement because logic demanded it. Grace accepted because she believed marriage was a promise, not a competition. From the first day, she understood exactly where she stood. She wasn't the woman Lorenzo had once dreamed of marrying. She wasn't the glamorous Sophia Romano. She wasn't the breathtaking beauty magazines chased for photographs, or the elegant socialite politicians rushed to impress. Grace was simply Grace. A quiet woman with soft curves, kind eyes, and a smile that seemed to exist more for comforting others than drawing attention to herself. The servants noticed something strange almost immediately. Unlike previous women who had entered the mansion hoping to enjoy its luxury, Grace learned everyone's names within a week. She remembered birthdays. She thanked gardeners for planting flowers. She asked chefs whether they had eaten before serving dinner. When an elderly housekeeper developed arthritis in both hands, Grace personally prepared breakfast every morning until a replacement could be hired. She never announced these acts of kindness. She simply believed people deserved to be seen. Yet kindness carried little value inside the brutal world of organized crime. Among the capos, respect came from fear. Power came from violence. Influence came from appearance, and by those standards, Grace seemed painfully out of place. Whenever Lorenzo hosted lavish charity galas or political fundraisers, whispers followed her across every ballroom. "She's too ordinary. I still don't understand why Boss Lorenzo married her." Sophia would have looked perfect beside him. The empire deserves a queen, not a caretaker. Grace heard every word. She never answered. Instead, she smiled politely and continued greeting guests as though nothing had happened. That silence confused many people. Some mistook it for weakness. Others assumed she lacked pride. Only a handful of longtime servants understood the truth. Grace wasn't remaining silent because she had nothing to say. She remained silent because she refused to let bitterness become part of who she was. Every Friday morning, while Lorenzo negotiated billion-dollar shipping contracts or settled conflicts between rival families, Grace quietly visited the rehabilitation center, funded by the De Luca Foundation. Most patients there were former security officers injured while protecting the organization. Many had lost limbs. Others would never walk again. Grace remembered every name. She listened to every story. She celebrated every small improvement as though it were a miracle. One veteran bodyguard often joked that Mrs. DeLuca smiled at them more warmly than anyone had since they were discharged from the hospital. Another admitted he continued physical therapy only because he didn't want to disappoint her. None of those conversations ever reached Lorenzo. Grace never mentioned them. She wasn't collecting gratitude. She was simply giving what she believed love required. Late one rainy evening, Lorenzo finally returned home after nearly 4 days away. His tailored black suit was stained with dust from construction sites and smoke from abandoned warehouses where tense negotiations had nearly become wars. Grace met him at the entrance without asking questions. Dinner waited on the table. Fresh coffee had already been poured. She noticed a shallow cut across his knuckles. Without a word, she retrieved a small medical kit. Lorenzo frowned. "It's nothing." "I know," Grace answered softly. "But untreated wounds become larger ones." She disinfected the cut carefully. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply unfamiliar. For a brief moment, Lorenzo found himself watching the concentration in her eyes instead of thinking about tomorrow's negotiations. Then his phone vibrated. Another crisis demanded his attention. He stood immediately. "I have to go." Grace nodded. "I know." No complaint, no disappointment, only understanding. As Lorenzo walked toward the waiting convoy, he never noticed that dinner remained untouched behind him. Grace quietly asked the staff to pack everything for the night security team instead. Food should never be wasted, especially not when someone else could use it. Weeks later, another charity banquet filled the grand ballroom of the DeLuca Hotel. Politicians, judges, celebrities, and business executives gathered beneath crystal chandeliers while cameras captured every smile. Grace moved through the room, greeting guests with effortless warmth. Across the ballroom, however, she overheard 2 influential women laughing. If Lorenzo had married Sophia, they would have looked like royalty. One of them glanced toward Grace before adding with a smirk, "Instead, he married Charity." The women laughed. Grace paused for only a second. Then she continued walking. No anger, no tears, no confrontation, only quiet dignity. High above the ballroom, Lorenzo happened to witness the exchange from a private balcony. He saw the laughter. He saw Grace hear every cruel word. He saw her choose kindness anyway. For reasons he couldn't explain, an unfamiliar feeling settled in his chest. Not guilt, not admiration. Something quieter, something he didn't yet understand. Before he could think further, his chief advisor approached with urgent news. There has been movement from the Romano family. At the mention of that surname, Lorenzo's expression hardened. Sophia Romano, the woman he hadn't seen in 3 years, had just returned to New York. Sophia Romano returned to New York as though she had never truly left. She didn't announce her arrival. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply appeared. The first invitation arrived on Lorenzo's desk 3 days later, a charity auction jointly organized by several influential families. Refusing to attend would insult powerful allies, so Lorenzo accepted without hesitation. Grace accompanied him, just as she always did. The ballroom shimmered beneath golden chandeliers, its polished marble floors reflecting the wealth of America's most dangerous elite. Politicians exchanged smiles with judges. Billionaires toasted beside mafia capos. Every conversation carried hidden motives. Grace wore a simple midnight blue gown, elegant, modest. She never tried to outshine anyone. When Lorenzo entered, Cameras flashed from every direction. Seconds later, another wave of whispers spread across the room. Sophia had arrived. She descended the grand staircase, wearing a silver evening dress that seemed designed to command every pair of eyes in the room. Her smile was flawless, her confidence effortless. She greeted senators by name. She embraced old family friends. Even veteran capos who rarely smiled welcomed her warmly. It was as if the past had returned, wearing expensive perfume. Grace noticed Lorenzo glance toward Sophia for only a moment. She looked away before he could catch her watching. She had promised herself years ago that she would never compete for attention. Not with beauty. Not with jealousy. Not with anger. If Lorenzo's heart had once belonged to another woman, forcing him to forget would never create genuine love. Across the ballroom, Sophia approached with perfect timing. Lorenzo. Her voice carried the warmth of an old memory. It's been a long time. Lorenzo remained composed. It has. Sophia smiled before turning toward Grace. And you must be Grace. Her expression radiated kindness, at least on the surface. I've heard wonderful things about your charity work. Grace returned the smile politely. Thank you. I only try to help where I can. Sophia reached out and briefly squeezed Grace's hand. I hope we'll become friends. The surrounding guests exchanged approving glances. How graceful, how mature, how generous. No one saw the brief satisfaction hidden behind Sophia's eyes. That evening became the beginning of a carefully planned performance. Over the following weeks, Sophia seemed to appear everywhere Lorenzo happened to be. Business galas, political fundraisers, hospital charity visits, cultural events. She never forced conversations. She never demanded attention. She simply arrived at exactly the right moment. If Lorenzo gave a speech, she applauded first. If photographers gathered, she somehow stood within the frame. If reporters asked difficult questions, she answered with elegant diplomacy before anyone else could. Soon newspapers began publishing photographs that unsettled Grace more than she wished to admit. The Mafia Boss and his former fiancée reunite at charity event. The legendary partnership everyone missed. The woman who once captured Lorenzo De Luca's heart. None of the articles mentioned Grace until the final paragraph, sometimes not at all. Inside the De Luca mansion, whispers slowly returned. Miss Sophia understands high society better. She was born for this world. Mrs. De Luca is kind. But Miss Sophia looks like a queen. Grace overheard every comparison. She never corrected anyone. Instead, she devoted herself even more deeply to the people who depended on her. One afternoon, she learned that a young security officer's daughter urgently needed heart surgery. The De Luca Foundation's approval process would take weeks. The child did not have weeks. Without informing Lorenzo, Grace quietly sold a collection of jewelry she had received as wedding gifts. The operation was scheduled within 48 hours. The grateful father fell to his knees in tears. Grace gently helped him stand. Thank me by taking your daughter home. No parent should ever have to choose between love and money. The man never forgot those words. Neither did the hospital staff. Yet once again, Grace never told Lorenzo. Not because she wanted secrecy, because she believed kindness lost something when it demanded recognition. Meanwhile, Sophia's influence continued growing. One afternoon, Lorenzo's convoy came under sudden attack while leaving a construction project. Gunfire erupted from abandoned buildings. Bodyguards reacted instantly. Before anyone else moved, Sophia rushed toward Lorenzo and pushed him behind an armored SUV. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. The attackers fled. Reporters arrived minutes later.
Every headline praised Sofia's courage. Former fiancé risks her life to protect Mafia Boss. Television stations replayed the footage for days. No one questioned why photographers had somehow been present before the shooting even began. No one noticed that Sofia had moved only after Lorenzo's security team had already formed a protective shield. Only Grace frowned. Not from jealousy, from instinct. Something about the timing felt rehearsed. Late that evening, Lorenzo returned home exhausted. Grace waited with dinner already prepared. He noticed her studying him. "You seem worried." Grace hesitated. "I may be wrong, but—" He looked up. "I don't think these incidents are happening by coincidence." Lorenzo's expression remained calm. "You think someone is targeting Sofia?" Grace slowly shook her head. "No. I think someone wants everyone to believe she's saving you." The room fell silent. Lorenzo considered her words for several seconds before speaking. "You're overthinking this." Perhaps she was. Grace lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He returned to reading intelligence reports. She quietly cleared the untouched dinner from the table. Outside, rain tapped softly against the mansion windows. Far across the city, inside a luxury penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Sofia poured 2 glasses of expensive wine. Across from her sat Dante Moretti, one of the most ruthless mafia bosses on the East Coast. He studied the newest newspaper spread across the table. Lorenzo, Sofia, standing side by side beneath flashing cameras, exactly as planned. Dante smiled slowly. "He's starting to see what we want him to see." Sofia lifted her glass. "And Grace?" Dante chuckled. "The quiet ones are always the easiest to erase." Neither of them realized that Grace Collins would soon become the one person capable of destroying everything they had spent months building.
The annual East Coast Mafia Summit had survived wars, betrayals, federal investigations, and countless assassination attempts. For more than 40 years, no enemy had dared attack it directly, until tonight. The DeLuca Grand Convention Hall stood beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds, surrounded by armored vehicles, rooftop snipers, bomb detection teams, and nearly 500 armed security officers. Every major mafia family had sent representatives. Powerful politicians mingled discreetly with shipping magnates and influential businessmen, pretending they were attending nothing more than another charity gala. To outsiders, it looked elegant. To those who understood the underworld, it was the closest thing America had to a royal court. Lorenzo DeLuca entered the ballroom exactly at 8 o'clock. The room instinctively fell silent. He acknowledged the guests with a calm nod before taking his place near the center of the hall. Grace followed several steps behind. Not because Lorenzo demanded it, because she never wanted to stand where she didn't belong. As always, she smiled warmly at the waiters carrying silver trays through the crowd. She noticed a young waitress whose trembling hands nearly dropped a tray of champagne. Grace gently steadied it. "Slow down," she whispered with an encouraging smile. "Nobody remembers a delayed drink. They remember kindness." The young woman exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Mrs. DeLuca." Nearby, several veteran bodyguards exchanged quiet smiles. She had done it again. Calmed another frightened employee without asking for recognition. At the opposite end of the ballroom, Sofia Romano made her entrance. Every camera pivoted toward her. Every conversation paused. She wore a breathtaking crimson gown that captured every flash of light. When she approached Lorenzo, photographers eagerly gathered around them. Grace quietly stepped aside before anyone asked. She had grown accustomed to disappearing. The evening unfolded exactly as expected. Political speeches, business agreements, champagne toasts, measured smiles hiding dangerous intentions. Yet beneath the polished elegance, something felt wrong. Grace noticed one of the musicians briefly adjusting an earpiece. A waiter carrying wine never served a single guest. Two security officers she had never seen before exchanged subtle hand signals near the eastern exit. None of those details alone seemed alarming. Together, they formed a pattern. Her heartbeat quickened. She slowly moved closer to Lorenzo. Across the ballroom, hidden inside a maintenance corridor, a masked man assembled a precision rifle. His breathing remained perfectly steady. Through the scope, Lorenzo's forehead rested inside the crosshairs. Another voice crackled through the assassin's earpiece. "Begin." The ballroom exploded. Glass shattered. Automatic gunfire tore through crystal chandeliers. Guests screamed as bullets ripped across marble columns. Tables overturned. Bodyguards rushed toward their assigned protectees, while smoke grenades filled the enormous hall with blinding gray clouds. Within seconds, the summit became a battlefield. Protect the boss. Dozens of DeLuca guards formed defensive positions. Lorenzo immediately reached for his concealed weapon. "Get everyone out!" His voice cut through the chaos. Grace searched the room instead of running. Her eyes instinctively followed movement. Doorways, balconies, windows. Then she saw it. High above the ballroom, a faint reflection. A sniper. The rifle wasn't aimed randomly. It was aimed directly at Lorenzo. Everything around her seemed to slow. She saw Lorenzo turning toward another burst of gunfire. She saw the sniper's finger tightening around the trigger. She saw Sophia several meters away, perfectly safe. Grace didn't think. She moved. "Lorenzo!" She threw herself toward him with every ounce of strength she possessed. The rifle fired. The bullet struck. Pain exploded across her back like fire. The force nearly drove her to the floor. For one terrifying second, she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. Warm blood spread beneath her dress. But Lorenzo was alive. He had stumbled forward just enough for the bullet to miss his heart. Grace bit down hard enough to taste blood. She refused to cry out. If Lorenzo turned around now, he would stop fighting. More people would die. She forced herself upright. No one looked at her. Everyone's attention had already shifted elsewhere. Sophia suddenly screamed. "Lorenzo!" She stumbled dramatically into the open, collapsing onto the polished marble floor as crimson blood spread across her gown. Photographers, security officers, capos. Everyone rushed toward her. "Miss Sophia! Protect her. She's been shot." Lorenzo instinctively turned. "Sophia!" He sprinted through the smoke toward his former fiancée. Grace watched him disappear into the crowd. For a single heartbeat, a quiet sadness crossed her face. Not because he had chosen another woman, because she realized he never knew she had chosen him. Then she pushed the thought away. There were still people to save. A section of the ballroom ceiling collapsed. Several catering staff became trapped beneath heavy beams. Ignoring the blood soaking through her own clothing, Grace ran toward them. "Help me!" She lifted splintered wood alongside two injured guards. One frightened waitress remained frozen beside the fire. Grace wrapped both arms around the young woman. "Look at me. Breathe. We're leaving together." The terrified employee nodded through tears. Grace led her toward an emergency exit while supporting an elderly servant whose leg had been shattered by falling debris. Every step sent unbearable pain through her wounded back. Still, she kept walking. Across the ballroom, Lorenzo reached Sophia. She clung weakly to his arm. "I tried to protect you." Blood covered her hands. Her breathing sounded ragged. Lorenzo held her tightly. "Stay with me. You're going to be all right." Neither of them noticed that the blood staining Sophia's dress came almost entirely from another wounded guard she had fallen beside. Meanwhile, Grace quietly disappeared into the smoke-filled service corridor with the last group of terrified employees. No applause, no witnesses, no cameras, only silence. At the end of the empty hallway, once everyone else had escaped, her knees finally gave way. She collapsed against the cold concrete wall, one trembling hand pressed against the wound in her back. Dark blood pooled beneath her. Her wedding ring caught the dim emergency lights as consciousness slowly slipped away. Far above the corridor, the sounds of sirens echoed through the night. The Empire believed it knew who had saved its king. It couldn't have been more wrong.
By sunrise, every major news outlet had already decided what the story was. Sofia Romano had saved Lorenzo De Luca. The headlines praised her courage. Television commentators called her the woman who willingly stood between death and the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast. Social media flooded with admiration. Photographs of Lorenzo carrying Sofia toward an ambulance spread across every screen. No one asked about Grace Collins. In most reports, she wasn't mentioned at all. If she appeared, it was only as a single line. Mrs. De Luca was safely evacuated during the attack. The irony was almost unbearable. The woman who had nearly died protecting an empire had become invisible. Lorenzo had not slept for 36 hours. His command center inside the De Luca headquarters resembled a war room. Maps covered the walls. Security footage streamed across dozens of monitors. Every captain demanded revenge. Every advisor wanted answers. 3 senior capos stood around the conference table. This was Moretti. No one else has the resources. We should retaliate immediately. Lorenzo listened without speaking. His thoughts remained elsewhere. Something felt wrong. He had survived dozens of assassination attempts during his rise to power. His instincts had never failed him. Yet this time, the pieces refused to fit together. Sofia's injuries had been surprisingly minor. The attackers seemed strangely prepared. Too many cameras had arrived too quickly. Too many events had unfolded almost perfectly. Still, he had no evidence, only instinct. Several floors below, Grace finally regained consciousness. White hospital lights blurred above her. Every breath sent unbearable pain across her back. A doctor immediately noticed her open eyes. "Mrs. De Luca, you were lucky." Grace smiled faintly. "I don't feel very lucky." The doctor returned the smile. "The bullet missed your spine by less than an inch. You lost an enormous amount of blood. You should still be unconscious." Grace's first question surprised everyone. "How many survived?" The doctor blinked. "You mean the employees, the guards, the guests? How many?" The physician looked down at the chart. "Almost everyone. Thanks largely to whoever kept leading people through the service corridors." Grace quietly closed her eyes. "Good." She never said another word. She never mentioned the sniper. She never mentioned Lorenzo. She never claimed what she had done. Across the city, Sofia occupied the presidential suite of the De Luca Medical Center. Flowers filled the room. Television crews waited outside. Politicians sent handwritten letters. Even rival mafia families praised her bravery. When Lorenzo arrived, she smiled weakly. "I was afraid. I'd never see you again." He sat beside her bed. "You saved my life." Sofia lowered her eyes modestly. "I only did what anyone who loved you would do." The words lingered in the room. Lorenzo didn't answer. He simply thanked her before leaving. As soon as the door closed, Sofia's exhausted smile disappeared. She picked up a secure satellite phone hidden beneath her blanket. One call. One sentence. It worked. Far away. Dante Moretti smiled. "Excellent. Now comes the easy part." That same evening, inside the intensive care wing, A nurse hurried toward Lorenzo's security detail. "Boss, one of your bodyguards just woke up." Lorenzo immediately changed direction. The veteran guard barely looked alive. Machines breathed for him. Bandages covered nearly half his body. Yet the moment Lorenzo entered, the wounded man struggled to lift his hand. "Boss?" Lorenzo stepped closer. "Don't speak. Save your strength." The guard slowly shook his head. "No. Before. I forget." With trembling fingers, he reached beneath the hospital blanket. He removed a crushed digital security recorder. Its casing had been pierced by shrapnel. Blood still stained the cracked surface. "I found this." Lorenzo accepted the damaged device. "What is it?" "Hallway. Camera." The bodyguard's breathing became weaker. Then he looked directly into Lorenzo's eyes. "Boss, it wasn't Miss Sophia who took the bullet." Silence. Absolute silence. The machines continued their steady rhythm. No one in the room moved. For several seconds, Lorenzo simply stared at the dying guard. "What did you say?" The bodyguard swallowed painfully. "It was Mrs. Grace." Those 3 words struck harder than any bullet. Within minutes, the damaged recorder had been connected to the DeLuca Intelligence Laboratory. Engineers recovered fragments of corrupted footage. The video flickered, skipped, recovered, then stabilized. The entire command room fell silent. Every advisor watched. Every capo stood frozen. Frame by frame, the truth unfolded. Lorenzo appeared in the center of the ballroom. The sniper aimed. Grace saw him first. Without hesitation, she ran. She pushed Lorenzo forward. The bullet struck her back. She staggered, but never cried out. Seconds later, Sophia deliberately moved into the open. She fell beside another wounded guard. Blood from the dying man spread across her elegant dress. From a distance, it looked exactly as though she had been shot protecting Lorenzo. The deception was flawless. The footage continued. Grace ignored her own wound. She carried an injured waiter, then a frightened waitress, then 2 wounded guards, then an elderly servant trapped beneath burning debris. Each rescue left a trail of blood behind her. Finally, she reached an abandoned service corridor. She looked back one last time toward the ballroom, toward Lorenzo. A faint smile crossed her face. Not because he had seen her, because he was alive. Then she collapsed alone. No witnesses, no applause, no recognition. The screen went black. No one spoke. The silence inside the command center became suffocating. Several veteran capos lowered their heads. One elderly advisor quietly removed his glasses. Another covered his face. Lorenzo remained standing before the frozen screen. His expression never changed, yet something inside him shattered. For the first time in years, the man feared by every mafia family in America could no longer bear looking at himself.
The recording ended. No one in the command center dared to breathe. Lorenzo stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of Grace collapsing alone in the abandoned corridor. The silence felt heavier than every gun battle he had ever survived. For 3 years, she had stood beside him without asking for recognition. For 3 years, he had mistaken quiet devotion for ordinary existence. And on the night she nearly died to save his life, he had run to another woman. The realization hollowed him from the inside, not because the empire had been deceived, because he had. By his own blindness, without a word, Lorenzo walked out of the room. No one stopped him. No one knew what to say to the man who had finally discovered the greatest betrayal had not been committed against his empire. It had been committed against the woman who loved him most. Before sunrise, another message arrived. Not from an ally, Not from the police. From Dante Moretti. Only 2 sentences appeared on Lorenzo's encrypted phone. I have your wife. You chose the wrong woman once. Choose carefully this time. Attached was a live video. Grace sat tied to a steel chair inside an abandoned shipping warehouse. Her face was pale. Her back remained heavily bandaged. She had barely recovered from surgery. Yet she refused to lower her head. Around her stood dozens of armed mercenaries. Explosive charges lined the steel pillars supporting the warehouse. Behind them, nearly 40 innocent hostages knelt with their hands bound. Warehouse workers, truck drivers, cleaning staff, people who had nothing to do with mafia wars. Dante smiled into the camera. I've always admired your leadership, Lorenzo. So today, I'm giving you a choice. The Empire or your wife. The transmission ended. Within minutes, the DeLuca Council assembled. Senior advisors argued over one another. It's a trap. He wants to eliminate you. If you go alone, he'll kill you. We mobilize every family. We surround the docks. We protect the boss. Lorenzo listened quietly, then asked one question. How long before those explosives detonate? His intelligence chief answered. Less than 1 hour. The room became tense. One elderly capo spoke carefully. Boss, the Empire cannot risk losing you. If necessary, Mrs. DeLuca must be sacrificed. Several others silently nodded. It was the logical decision, the practical decision, the decision Lorenzo himself would once have made. Instead, he slowly removed the leadership ring from his finger, the ring worn only by the head of the DeLuca family. He placed it on the conference table. Every man in the room stared. Then Lorenzo removed his pistol, his second weapon, his tactical knife. One by one, he laid them beside the ring. I built this empire believing power meant never showing weakness. His voice remained calm, but the strongest person in my life was bleeding behind me while I never even turned around. He looked at every advisor. I already failed her once. A long silence followed. I won't fail her twice. Without waiting for permission, he walked toward the exit, alone. The abandoned warehouse stood beside an empty harbor. Wind howled through rusted shipping containers. Floodlights illuminated the entrance. Hundreds of Moretti gunmen waited. Lorenzo arrived exactly as instructed. No bodyguards, no convoy, no sniper support, only himself. Dante stepped forward, laughing. I honestly didn't think you'd come. Lorenzo continued walking. I said I'd come. You wanted me. I'm here. Dante gestured toward Grace. Interesting. You abandoned your empire for one woman. Lorenzo looked only at Grace. Their eyes met for the first time since the summit. She immediately noticed something different. Not in his clothes. Not in his posture. In his eyes. The arrogance had disappeared. Only regret remained. Dante smiled. One last chance. Kneel. Swear loyalty to me. I might let her live. Lorenzo never hesitated. He dropped to one knee. Then both. The most feared mafia boss on the East Coast knelt before his greatest enemy. Gasps echoed through the warehouse. Even Dante looked surprised. You would really do this? Lorenzo answered quietly. I should have knelt much sooner. Grace felt tears fill her eyes, not because he had surrendered, because for the first time, he truly saw her. Dante slowly raised his pistol. What a touching ending. He aimed directly at Lorenzo's head. Goodbye. At that exact moment, Grace noticed something attached beneath the steel platform above them. Rows of military explosives. The trigger wire disappeared behind Dante's men. Her heart stopped. If Dante fired now, the explosives would detonate. Everyone inside the warehouse would die. including the innocent hostages. Grace didn't think. She threw herself sideways with all the strength she had left. The damaged chair crashed against the concrete. The impact snapped one of the restraints around her wrist. Ignoring the agony tearing through her healing wound, she screamed with every ounce of air left in her lungs. "Lorenzo! The explosives!" Instinct took over. Lorenzo lunged toward Dante. The pistol discharged. Chaos erupted. Mercenaries opened fire. Hostages scattered. Explosions ripped through the outer walls as damaged fuel tanks ignited. Steel beams collapsed. Smoke swallowed the warehouse. Grace crawled toward the manual detonator, mounted beside a support column. A wounded guard tried to stop her. "You'll die!" She looked at him with quiet determination. Then help everyone else. With trembling hands, she tore the ignition cable free. The primary explosives failed. Only secondary charges detonated. The blast shattered windows across the harbor, but spared the warehouse from total collapse. Lorenzo fought through the smoke toward Grace. He caught her, just before another collapsing beam struck the ground. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. He simply held her, as though letting go would erase the second chance life had somehow given him. Around them, surviving DeLuca reinforcements stormed the warehouse after tracing Lorenzo's location. Dante's empire began collapsing in real time. Meanwhile, intelligence officers broadcast the recovered security footage from the summit to every Mafia family present at the operation. The evidence was undeniable. Sofia's deception, Dante's conspiracy, Grace's sacrifice. Every lie unraveled before the eyes of the underworld. The empire that had once ignored the quiet woman now witnessed the truth she had never asked anyone to see.
6 months later, New York had stopped talking about the attack. The fires had been extinguished. The damaged warehouse had been demolished. Dante Moretti's organization no longer existed. His captains had either surrendered, disappeared, or pledged loyalty to other families. The empire he had spent decades building collapsed in less than a month once his conspiracy became public. Sofia Romano's fate proved even more humiliating. The recovered security footage, financial records, encrypted messages, witness testimonies. Together they destroyed every carefully crafted lie she had lived behind. The woman once celebrated as the savior of Lorenzo DeLuca became the face of one of the greatest betrayals in Mafia history. Even the politicians who had once welcomed her refused to speak her name. No one visited her prison cell. No one defended her. Beauty had earned admiration. Truth demanded justice. Grace recovered slowly. The bullet had left scars that would remain for the rest of her life. Some mornings, pain greeted her before sunrise. Simple movements reminded her that healing was never as quick as surviving. Yet she never complained. Instead of hiding inside the DeLuca mansion, she quietly returned to the rehabilitation center she had always loved. The wounded guards welcomed her like family. The nurses cried when she walked through the doors. The young waitress whose life Grace had saved during the summit ran forward and embraced her without warning. "I never got to thank you." Grace smiled gently. "You don't need to. You're alive. That's enough." Those words spread throughout the DeLuca organization faster than any official announcement. Employees no longer called her simply Mrs. DeLuca. They began calling her La Regina Silenziosa, the Silent Queen. Not because Lorenzo declared it, because thousands of ordinary people believed she had earned it. Lorenzo changed in ways no one expected. He still commanded respect. He still negotiated billion-dollar agreements. He still ruled with calm authority. But something inside him had softened. Every Friday morning, he accompanied Grace to the rehabilitation center. He learned the names of injured bodyguards. He visited widows whose husbands had died protecting his organization. He personally established scholarships for the children of fallen employees. When advisors questioned why the boss spent so much time away from business meetings, Lorenzo answered with quiet certainty. An empire isn't measured by how many people fear its leader. It's measured by how many lives that leader protects. The older capos exchanged surprised glances. The younger ones listened carefully. For the first time in decades, the culture of the De Luca family began to change. One autumn evening, invitations arrived for the annual De Luca Founders Banquet. It was the most prestigious gathering of the year. Governors, federal judges, international business leaders, bank presidents, foreign diplomats, every major mafia family on the East Coast. More than 2,000 guests filled the historic ballroom. Everyone expected Lorenzo De Luca to deliver another speech celebrating another successful year. Instead, when his name was announced, he walked onto the stage, then turned around. Grace. The entire ballroom followed his gaze. Grace stood near the back of the room, wearing a simple emerald gown. Elegant, graceful, never extravagant. She looked confused as Lorenzo extended his hand toward her. Slowly, she walked onto the stage. The room became completely silent. No cameras flashed. No one wished to interrupt whatever was about to happen. Lorenzo accepted a small velvet box from one of his advisors. Then, before presidents, judges, business titans, and every mafia boss on the East Coast, he lowered himself onto one knee. Thousands of people gasped. Grace's eyes widened. "Lorenzo!" His voice trembled for the first time anyone could remember. 3 years ago, I believed strength looked like beauty. I believed loyalty spoke the loudest. I believed I understood what love was. He paused, struggling to steady his breathing. I was wrong. He looked directly into her eyes. The strongest woman in my life was quietly bleeding while I looked the other way. Silence spread across the ballroom. Several veteran capos lowered their heads. Many remembered the summit. Many remembered believing the same lie. Lorenzo opened the velvet box. Inside rested Grace's wedding ring, restored after being recovered from the blood-soaked floor of the convention hall. With hands that were no longer perfectly steady, he slipped the ring gently back onto her finger. Today, I don't ask you to forgive the mafia boss. He swallowed hard. I ask you to forgive the man who finally learned what love really looks like. Tears filled Grace's eyes, not because he had apologized before thousands, not because the most powerful man in the room had humbled himself, but because every word carried something she had waited years to see. Not guilt, not obligation. Love. Real love. She slowly knelt beside him, instead of allowing him to remain alone. Then she gently lifted him back to his feet. You don't have to spend the rest of your life paying for yesterday. She smiled through tears. We still have tomorrow. For several heartbeats, neither of them spoke. They simply held each other's hands. The ballroom erupted. Thousands of guests rose to their feet in a standing ovation. One by one, the veteran capos bowed toward Grace, not because protocol demanded it, not because she was Lorenzo De Luca's wife, but because she had become the woman who silently saved the most feared empire in America, and asked for nothing in return. Lorenzo looked across the sea of people before turning back to Grace. This time, he did not walk ahead of her. He walked beside her, equal, at last understanding that kingdoms are rarely saved by those who stand closest to the throne. They are saved by the quiet souls willing to bleed when no one is watching.